I just want to thank everybody for coming. I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces, so welcome everybody. This is the first part of a four-part MBA Lite series. Tonight I would like to introduce Susan Hanlon, and she's the Assistant Dean at Akron University.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I good? So just to clarify, I'm not the Assistant Dean of the entire University of Akron, okay? I'm the Assistant Dean of the College of Business Administration, and my primary responsibilities are undergraduate programs. And before that, in my previous life, I was faculty for 20 years before, as I say, before I went to the dark side and became an administrator. I was one of those faculty members who always said I would never become an administrator because I didn't want to ruin my life, because faculty life is very awesome. But I did it, and it's been very interesting. And actually, to set up what I'm going to talk about tonight, it's one of the few opportunities that I've had to actually do something that I taught for many years in our graduate program. So it's been a whole different view of the world, and I keep telling everybody I don't intend to retire as an administrator, so I hope to get back to being faculty sometime soon. So I would like to thank the Hudson Library for inviting me to speak tonight, and the Burton Morgan Foundation. As the former director, my first administrative assignment was as assistant dean and being director of our graduate program. So I was director of our MBA. So it was interesting to me to be asked to speak at an MBA Lite program. And I will tell you that we use that term MBA Lite in not such a nice way sometimes. What we're referring to, I'm sure you're all very aware, some of you probably have MBAs. There are all types of MBAs out there today. And it's a very hyper-competitive environment, especially in Northeast Ohio. Depending which side you're on, you're either blessed or cursed to be in an area where there are a lot of MBA programs. Ours is an AACSB accredited traditional program, but there are a lot that are what we call MBA Lite, where they aren't quite as traditional as ours, and we struggle with finding that sweet point, in between what they're obviously offering that a lot of people want and what we want to offer, we think is the right thing to offer. So I think this is appropriately named is MBA Lite, and I'm happy to be here. I will tell you that, my experience is teaching graduate students in an MBA program, but I am going to try and keep it light. I specifically, when I chose my topic, I want to, and I'm sure that you're most interested in hearing more real-world application sort of things as opposed to a lot of theory. So I will really try to keep that to a minimum and tell you some real application things. I hope you'll feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll be throwing out some discussion questions to you, and you should feel free if you have a question as we go along. Certainly let me know that you have a question, and we can, I hope we'll have some lively discussion. So the plan for this evening, what I intend to cover is basically I'm going to talk about appreciative inquiry. Are you familiar with the appreciative inquiry? A handful of people are familiar with that. Okay, so first I'm going to spend some time, and we're going to talk just broadly about change. We'll talk about it a little bit at the interpersonal level and at the organization group level. So we'll talk about the people's reactions to change, to forces for change, and importance of change for organizations today in our current business environment. And then I'll talk about appreciative inquiry. I'll talk a little bit about its theoretical foundations, its link to positive psychology, how it is different than our typical approach to change, than a traditional approach to change. We'll go through the nuts and bolts of appreciative inquiry. We'll talk about how to conduct an appreciative inquiry summit, and I'll give you a handful of examples of using appreciative inquiry. We'll also have a little bit of a discussion about why does appreciative inquiry work, and what would be some of the instances in which it's most effective, or when doesn't it work also. I mean, it's not a silver bullet, it's not going to fix everything. And then also going to throw out a few modifications of it that I think have potential. And then I'll draw some conclusions, and then we can have some discussion if we haven't already had that discussion. So let's talk about change. When I say change, and when you think of change, and you may, depending upon where you are in your life right now, when you think of change, you might think interpersonally, or you might think professionally, organizationally. But just word association. When you hear the word change, what are the things that come to mind? What are the other words? Fear. Improvement. Opportunity. Disruption. Risky.
Inflection point.
Pardon me? Inflection point, okay. Anyone else?
Points in the pocket.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Resistance. Anyone think of fun? Okay. Anyone think of fast? Okay. Anybody think of rewarding? We had opportunities, right? But typically, when the average person, and I think especially probably if you think of yourself at work, when the average person is thrown that notion at work of change, I think most of us get a slight feeling in the pit of our stomach, like, oh no, oh no, this is going to be, it's going to affect me negatively, it's going to be risky, it's probably not going to work, it's going to take forever, it's scary, it's blah, 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 right? And then depending, again, on your past experiences and on the organization which you're in, then hopefully you move on to the things like, oh, but it will be an opportunity, and oh, this needs to be done, and that sort of thing. But I don't think that most people get to the words like fun, fast, meaningful, rewarding, and successful. And typically because we all have experiences that are not like that. Let me ask you another question. When do people change? When are people the most likely to change their behavior, change their attitudes, change their values? When they have to. So when they're forced, threatened, okay. Anybody think anything differently?
Something's not working.
When what?
Something's not working.
When something's not working.
Incentive?
When they have an incentive. Okay. I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I guess maybe let me add to this. When do people change in a way that is sustained?
When it's intrinsic.
When it's intrinsic. And what does that imply?
They desire to change.
They want to change. Okay? I will maintain that the change that you get when people are threatened, when they're forced, and even with some incentives, are typically short-lived. And when does that change behavior end? When the pressure's off, when the threats go away, when the incentive is taken away. Okay? But if you want to get truly sustainable change in individuals, most people need that to come from themselves. Okay, so typically people, I maintain that the kind of change that we're talking about, they change not when someone tells them to change, they change when they decide to change. And you may have had experiences with people that are, have alcohol abuse problems or some other kind of substance problems, and they can get threatened with everything under the sun. They have health problems. Your doctor tells you you're going to, die if you keep this up, right? And they keep it up, right? And typically, they will hit rock bottom and they will decide they have to change. And you go through the whole thing, and you can only change for yourself. You can't change for other people. It has to come from inside. So my context of talking about change is I'm talking about the kind of change that happens before you hit rock bottom, all right? So we're talking about organization change before it becomes a matter of you have no choice. This is it. It's being forced upon you. I'm talking about a change that occurs when things aren't totally broken. And when you talk about managing change and leading change, I think that's the biggest challenge there is. It's not that hard to get people to change when they're desperate or when things are really bad. But when you go into an organization and things are okay, maybe things are even going really well, it's pretty hard to get people to change. But that's going to be, why do we want to waste all these resources of going to the bottom? Let's not do that. Let's not waste all the resources of letting ourselves hit rock bottom. Let's change before we have to. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be proposing, that this is part of what we can accomplish with something like appreciative inquiry. Another question along those lines, just something to think about as we move on here, is can you change another person? You usually can't. We try our darndest, don't we? I'll be the first to say that women are constantly trying to change their husbands, right? After I've been married 36 years, it's finally like, yes, I know you don't really care what your clothes look like, and I'm not going to change you. I'm not going to change you. Left to his own devices, he'll still wear that horrible red T-shirt. And we went on a last trip, he took it with him in the suitcase, and I hid it. I cannot believe he brought this thing, right? But he, so you really cannot change another person. The only person you can change is yourself. I can change my reaction to what he does. I can just say, well, I'm not going to keep getting mad at this because all it does is ruin the vacation, right? Or whatever. So you can change your reaction to people. You can change how you behave with people. But you really can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself. So if you're in an organization and they're trying to get you to change, you need something where it's not just change that comes from above, that is thrust upon you, and you're told to change. It has to have some means of coming from inside, some means of being created and controlled by yourself personally, if you're truly going to change. I think that in today's world, when we talk about what is the key role of management of an organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, military, public, private, whatever, I think in 2013 that the key role is managing change, is getting change to happen and getting it to happen more quickly than we've done it in the past. I truly think that in my current role, I do get to talk to a lot of our business partners that are partners in the College of Business, a lot of executives, and that truly is the thing that keeps them awake at night. If we're lucky enough to be able to figure out what change needs to occur, then I have to figure out how to make it happen and how to make it happen 2 or 3 times faster than would be natural. Okay? So I think it's a really important topic. Let's look just a minute at broadly what is the kind of change, what's the environment that businesses are operating in today. I'm not going to go through and talk about all these, but this is a list that is, quite frankly, a little scarier than any list I've ever seen. And I've been looking at lists like this, teaching org transformation for a while. This comes from a body of work done by a couple of professors at Harvard. And they ask, their paradigm is that, capitalism is at risk, all right? And so these are the things that they look at in terms of what they think are the forces for change and really advocating a major paradigm change. So yeah, it's a pretty scary list. Anybody, do any of those pop out at anybody that you have a good example that you could give, or a question that you would raise about any of those? Any of them you haven't seen before when you think about changes in organization, in the general environment of organizations?
Well, most of them seem pretty straightforward, but inequality, what is that?
Inequality, I think, is this big thing of the disappearing middle class and just this broadening of the 2%ers, whatever, and then that gap is getting bigger and bigger.
I don't see socialism in there. Is there a reason why it doesn't list that?
Why what?
Socialism?
It's not in there? I think they're looking at state capitalism. I think that's code for socialism to them.
I find it strange that you have the one in the upper right, decline in health and education combined, because I think decline in education is probably one that should be in the center and the biggest.
And it's the worst, right? It's probably the foundation. Yeah. I would, and so we will argue with the professors from Harvard, right? That they've lumped them together. Yeah. Right. I agree.
I would say that it isn't so much that education is declining, is that it's not keeping up fast enough with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is changing faster than education. I mean, statistically, historically, looking at the numbers, we're actually educating more people now than we have. Higher graduation rates, but they're not educated with what they actually need to be prepared for this world.
And I also think you might think of the inequality issue with education, too. Our best are probably, well, they are. They're better than they ever were. But unfortunately, the worst are probably worse than they've ever been. And I think average is just sliding. Yeah, in addition to, yeah. Anything else? Any other points of interest? Okay. Another paradigm of pressures on organizations and the need for this more rapid change is a paradigm like Tom Friedman presents in The World is Flat. And he's talking, what interested me with one of the things on the Harvard paradigm that I didn't see was technology, and that's always been sort of a stable force for change for a long time. Well, and then you look at something like this, that's practically all Thomas Friedman talks about is technology. So his notion is technology is what is flattening the world. And what does he mean when he says that the world is flat? What does technology do to create these forces for change?
Makes it available to more people.
Makes it more equal for everybody. It's a level, when he says flattening, that we're leveling the playing field. And information is freedom. That's sort of a classic, right? That's a favorite. It's so much easier and so much more access to information. We have so much more connectivity. Who ever knew they really had 500 friends, right? I don't have 500 friends. My daughter does. I think I have 49, right? I'm like that commercial where you see where the girl's like, wow, she's up to 49 friends, And it gives more rapid and more even access to education, and then digitalization is just what keeps it speeding it up, because we could just keep doing it faster and faster. Okay, so one other factor to think about when we think about change is not just the individual components of it and the sources of it, but another is the rate of change. And that's, another piece of the puzzle. Why do we need to examine our approaches to change? Why do we need to figure out some way to do it faster and better and some way that it'll be sustained? And you already mentioned with education, we're just not keeping up. The change is so rapid. A good example of that is if you look at an example of the accelerating rate of change, consider that I'm going to give you 3 things that are in more than 30% of homes today. But these are 3 things that we know how long it took them to be widely accepted to be in 30% of homes, okay? It took 38 years for 30% of homes to have telephones, all right? It took 17 years for 30% of homes to have televisions. It took 7 years for 30% of homes to have internet access. Okay, and the telephones, I mean, we're not talking 500 years, right? I mean, the telephone's not that long ago. All right, so I think we've established the case that change is important. It's typically not a pleasant thing. It's typically not something that we're that good at. We're struggling with it, all right? So what I'm going to offer is a model that can help address the issue of change. And we're going to talk about appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is one of the, well, I will tell you that as a professor, this does put me, being able to talk to you about something that not only have I studied and taught, but also done, puts me in a pretty small group, okay? And I will also tell you that it is one of a few things, one of a few topics that I've had the opportunity to study, research, teach, and do, all right? And I will tell you, it's a pretty rewarding thing to be able to do all those. So at its most basic, appreciative inquiry is a paradigm change. Okay, it's a change in the way you think about change, right? So it's a paradigm switch. At its most basic, we are talking about moving from a deficit problem-solving approach to managing change to a positive and aspirational approach to managing change. All right? Now, you might not think of problem solving as being an especially negative thing or deficit thing, but we're going to talk about this here a minute. So appreciative inquiry, literally, we're talking about what we value, okay? And then we're also talking about asking questions and studying. Right, so those are the 2 things. That's sort of a common definition of it. The key words in that are collaborative, potential, and hope for the future. Okay. The thing that you get from appreciative inquiry that I haven't seen happen with other approaches to change is you get momentum and energy. So you truly do get speed, some amazing speed of getting lots of people to change. And typically when organizations venture into the world of appreciative inquiry, one of the main reasons they're doing it is to accelerate their rate of change, is to be able to, it's not that it is to accelerate it. And in order to accelerate it and sustain it, there has to be broad employee involvement. So that's another thing that when you say, I'm going to try appreciative inquiry, and you say to somebody, why do you want to try it? So because I want things to happen, I want the change to happen more quickly. I want it to have broad employee involvement, and I want to change the entire system at once. Okay? So I wanted to include all the stakeholders, I want it to be change that is integrated across functional areas. I don't want it to be a change in one silo at a time. And we've probably all been through that. We have a big change that we want to do. We start trying to do it one functional area at a time. It has to keep getting passed over those walls. That takes a long time. And it takes a lot of energy. So the basis of appreciative inquiry is using a parallel and temporary structure to make this happen, called the Appreciative Inquiry Summit. Okay, that is the basic thing. When you say you're going to use appreciative inquiry methodology, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to have an Appreciative Inquiry Summit. And that becomes this temporary structure where we flatten things out as much as we possibly can. We get the whole system in the room to the extent that we can, and we work on this all together as a system, as a piece, all right? It was created, appreciative inquiry was created in the early 1980s. It was actually created by a group of folks up at Case Western. David Cooperrider is the professor that is most associated with it. And they are, in academia, when you talk about appreciative inquiry, you're talking about what was created at Case. They have a thriving doctoral program in the area. They have a thriving, practitioner program in the area of appreciative inquiry. So it was created in the 1980s. It's been used by large organizations, small organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, public, private, and most interesting, I think, is how much it's been used in the military. And I have at the end of this just a few references if you want to read more about it. And one of them is a really cool example of a military use of where a base basically was slated to be closed, and they reinvented themselves, they transformed themselves using appreciative inquiry. All right. It's still not commonly used, but it is gaining momentum. And I don't know whether this is good or bad, but it's just to point out how much it is used. There's actually a whole sub-area of consulting for appreciative inquiry. So the minute the consultants get involved, it must be real, right? Or it must be, it's gained a certain momentum. So it's a whole specialized area of consulting. They have their own journals, they have their own newsletters, they have their own professional organizations, and I am not, a professional appreciative inquiry person. It basically has its roots in positive psychology, but I think if you go, what's interesting to me is that positive psychology, they like to say that appreciative inquiry is part of that. But positive psychology is relatively new, all right? So I think if you really want to trace the roots, you go back to humanistic psychology. How many of you are familiar with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs? Can anybody name those for us, what the different needs are? Okay, well, you got the bottom one and the top one, okay? Survival and self-actualization. Then there's three in between. Love and belonging. That's three. Security is second. There's one more. Yeah.
It's growth, improvement, something like that.
Self-esteem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So humanistic psychology was started before Maslow, but he did his work in the 1940s. But it was basically a change in the study of psychology where they said we're going to before the 1900s, psychology was basically a study of deviant behavior, okay? And so it was all a study of how do we fix, the crazy people, all right? And somebody and I should know who it was, but I can't come up with a name right now. But at the turn of the century, began to say, psychology is only going to make so much of a contribution to society if all we do is study the sick people and the deviant behavior. If we really want to contribute, what we should study is what creates the best human beings. Okay? So they called themselves humanistic psychology. And this was the psychology which begins to say, we're not so concerned about fixing the deviants. What we want to do is create more of the best examples of humanness that we can. So let's go, like Maslow went and he did all these interviews, and he called the people that he interviewed, including, he would have never gotten away with this today, young co-eds, right, in his office. But he did all these interviews with people that he called good human beings, all right? And what he tried to do was determine what is it that makes a good human being, the best example of the human race. And he also concluded then that the three lower needs that we mentioned, all right, so existence or what do you call it, survival, security, and social or relatedness, belongingness, that those needs are also had by animals. Okay, animals have those needs. The only two true human needs are self-esteem and self-actualization. And so, I frequently think that my dogs have self-esteem needs, like I think that they need a new coat because they'll like the way they look at that, right? They'll feel better about themselves. I know that's not true. But it is an interesting thing to think about. And most people, that all they know about Maslow is those 5 needs, that's all you remember. His big contribution was really defining those top 2 needs and saying the need for self-esteem and the need for self-actualization are the only 2 things that make us human. And they're the only 2 things that separate us from animals. So if we want to produce good human beings, we need to focus on how do we fulfill those top 2 needs. Think of how many people you know that don't have good self-esteem, they don't have purpose, they're not self-actualizing, they may have plenty of friends, they have security, they have survival, but they're not good human beings because they've stopped. All right? And then he actually went even further, and another psychologist named Frederick Herzberg picked up on this. And they actually, and most people don't know this about Maslow, but he and Herzberg, not together, but separately, they then concluded that because we spend so much time at work, that work and organizations had a huge potential to create good human beings. And so they focused their work on what can we do at work that will help people have self-esteem and self-actualization. When we talk about this intrinsic approach to change, think about the changes that you've made. Do you feel better about yourself when you made a change that someone made you make, or when you made a change because you wanted to do it? I mean, there's just so much wrapped up in that, right? You think of kids. When do kids, when do humans finally become more mature adults? When they do things for themselves that they've had a part in creating, that they have some control over, that they have accountability, right? And they make the change because they've created the change. And that's a whole lot of what's behind appreciative inquiry. Okay. So, why change from this deficit problem-solving approach? When you think about problems and solving problems, typically when someone comes to talk to you about a problem, right, they're talking to you about something you did wrong or something that somebody else did wrong. And that's where the conversation starts. Really inspirational, huh? Really conducive to quick, sustained change. So we immediately start these conversations talking about what the deficit is, what the negative is. And, you know, I don't know about you, but someone starts talking to me about something being wrong, then I immediately say, okay, then something needs fixed. And then it's not too far of a leap before I think, well, I guess if I'm the one that did something wrong and something needs fixed, probably I need fixed too. Well, that's a great way to start my week, right? You need fixed. Whereas, what if someone comes in and talks to you about a recent win, a recent success, okay? And they say to you, you know, someone did something good. You did something good. And then you think, well, okay, someone did something right, and that needs to be leveraged. There needs to be more of that. So someone, and hopefully it's me, my strengths they have value, and there needs to be more of them. So now when you talk to me about trying to get other people to do things, I'm coming from a very different place, all right? So that's and in some cases, you know, we're looking for, I think this is, you know, we're looking at, it is the difference between doing a root analysis of what's wrong and what's deficit to doing a root analysis of what's good and what's positive and what we want more of. If you really want to simplify it and be cynical about it, you could just say, well, it's just semantics. And you know what? If that's all you take out of this and you start to speak differently to people, that's fine. You're going to see a change. Okay? It's the difference between, you know, when you say you're interested in improving client relations, right? That's your change. That's what you want to happen. You can say, what can we do to minimize customer anger and complaints? So you have, you know, let's get the team together. We really need to improve our client relations. Very natural to sit there and start talking about what we do to make our clients angry, right? And what we do to get, so how can we minimize anger and complaints? An appreciative inquiry or a root positive approach to this would be to say, well, what would it be? I'll throw it open to you. What would be the difference? How would you change the semantics? How would you start that meeting if you were trying to not focus on failure and problems and you were trying to find the root of positive, desired behavior? Why do our clients like us? Let's look at the clients that love us. What is it that we do for them that makes us love us? How can we do more of that? And implicitly, if you start that conversation, you now start to uncover all these good things that you do and that other people do, right? You also start to discover good things about your clients. That breeds, it's like a flywheel, you know? I talk about one good thing, and I'm starting to get a little excited about that, you know? Then I begin to talk about another good thing, and then somebody else chimes in and says, well, yeah, you know, I know the last time I dealt with them, I did this, and they were just thrilled with that. So it creates so much more energy and so much more, yes, I'll go work on this, right? As opposed to when we start with, what are we doing to make clients angry? Oh, well, we're doing this, and then I heard somebody did this, and oh my gosh, by the time you're done, you're like, geez, do we do anything right? We're lucky we're even in business, right? And how much energy do you have when you're done with that? Typically not much, Because what you'll find is that when you start looking for problems, you find problems you never even knew you had, right? But the same thing can happen with good stuff. When you start looking for good things and when you start looking for wins, you will find good things that you didn't even know people were doing. Okay? So that's why we should change from deficit problem solving to a positive aspirational approach to change. It is about constructing a world of possibilities as opposed to a world of never-ending problems.
But since day one, you've been taught the problems.
Yes, you have. And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not saying that you get rid of that. Okay? I'm not, being a total Pollyannish, let's never talk about our problems, let's never say anything negative again, right? Blah, 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 blah. Let's all drink the Kool-Aid. But what I will say, there is definitely room for the rational problem-solving process. There is definitely a place for discipline, right? But typically, the place for that is not when you're trying to make a large-scale transformational change. When you're trying to fix things that have to be fixed today, right? When you're trying to maybe fix something in one department, that's where you use this. But if we then sit down and say, we want to transform the way we do things, we want to have a different view of ourselves, the problem-solving approach is not the way to go. So that's a good question.
I was just thinking about what you said. I work for a large organization, and we've formalized and institutionalized continuous improvement. And we have formal groups, business process improvement. To me, that seems like the left-hand side of your slide. It is more incremental. So we've built that into our organization.
Yeah.
But I don't see the right-hand side.
And you used a great way of looking at it for incremental change. That's a great way to go about it. So you add, a little bit of a change, and the notion is eventually you get to the big change. But when you're talking about wanting to transform, and you want the whole system to have some kind of change, that isn't going to work. I mean, that's just too slow. It's too slow.
Plus, I think each increment becomes a little bit harder.
Oh, it becomes a lot harder. And it gets more and more frustrating. Yeah. Right. Good, great comments, good questions. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of appreciative inquiry. How could you do this? And I will tell you that this is something you could go do tomorrow. I have taught MBA students long enough to know that if they don't walk out of a 2-hour class, and this isn't going to be a 2-hour class, but if they don't walk out of a 2-hour class with something they can use tomorrow, they think their MBA is a waste of time. Okay, so we all, as much as we push theory and models at them, and try and get them to think, we also know we have to give them a heavy dose of, you can use this tomorrow, all right? So the summit is the foundation of appreciative inquiry methodology. Key factor about it is getting the whole system in the room. You don't have to get every person in the system, but you have to get a representative from every part of your system in the room, okay? So we're talking every functional area, we're talking customers, we're talking suppliers, all right? We're talking your whole system in the room. The classic pure appreciative inquiry summit, which probably happens 20% of the time, right? But the stuff that David Cooper Ryder designed and the right way to do it is to have a summit that lasts 3 to 4 days. Okay, so you go away someplace, you go off-site, and you do this positive, aspirational, collaborative stuff for 3 to 4 days. I have seen it done with as few as 100 participants. The biggest one I know of was 10,000 participants with British Petroleum. Okay, 10,000 people they brought together for 3 to 4 days. I don't know if anybody in here is a roadway person. Roadway, I hesitate to use them as an example because they don't exist anymore, right? But they were actually one of the pioneers of appreciative inquiry. They were one of the first big organizations that David Cooper-Ryder used, to try it. And they did make massive changes. They were talking about a unionized environment and all that sort of thing. Who knows what else, they didn't change, but they were a big example of it. I think typical for a summit is 200 to 300 people. Now, why so many? Because this is meant for stable organizations trying to make big changes, all right? Stable organizations is code for what? What? Status quo, big, bureaucratic organizations, okay? Stuck in their ways. There's a book that was out years ago. It wasn't a very good book, but it had a cute title called Teaching the Elephant to Dance, okay? So there's a reason why the typical summit is 200 to 300 people, because you're talking 200 to 300 people at a time out of thousands of people in an organization. You do need to have facilitators. They don't have to be professional facilitators, but they need to be somebody outside your system. So they could be a colleague, in your functional area from another company. We actually, the example I'm going to tell you about is using at University of Akron. We used a couple facilitators from Roadway. They were folks who had worked at Roadway, and they were actually trained appreciative inquiry facilitators, and they had led the whole appreciative inquiry methodology at Roadway. So you do need facilitators. It does take quite a bit of planning. Okay, this is not something that you just, pull together at the last minute. And a big part of the summit is a task statement. So what that says is you have to have a specific purpose. You don't just have a summit to say we want to make major transformation to be better, all right? You have to have a specific task that you're trying to accomplish. So maybe it's client relations, maybe it's information system changes, but it needs to be something, a fairly specific task. And it needs to be by invitation. It needs to be by invitation. Why?
Targeted.
Okay, targeted to begin with, because you want the whole system, right? But I guess maybe another question would be, what's the opposite of invitation? What does invitation imply?
Making somebody feel special that they're invited.
They can choose to come. This cannot be a mandate. It cannot be an edict. It cannot be, you've been chosen to be in this summit and you have to be here. So it's an invitation. It's special. It's directed. It's targeted. It is by choice. Okay? Okay, what we did in the summit that I have experience with, and actually I was thinking, I think it might have been like 3 years ago this week that we did this, 2010, January of 2010. In the College of Business Administration, we had two important bodies of curriculum. One is in our undergraduate degree, it's called the core curriculum, and it's the classes that every business major takes. So no matter if you're an accounting major or a marketing major, right now it's 36 credits that everybody takes, all right? Pretty important piece of curriculum because it's the only common experience that a College of Business, University of Akron College of Business student has. It's the only way you have of creating some kind of consistency of your product is through that core. That core had not had significant change to it for over 20 years. Okay? And the world hadn't changed much, right? No. Things were still the same in 2010 as they were in 1980, right? I guess that's 30 years, 1990. And it was a very important piece of curriculum that we just did not pay attention to. The mentality, and we are still working on trying to bust this up. The mentality in academia is everyone thinks about their major. Professors' classes that they think are the most important classes they teach are the classes in their major. It's not the service classes. It's not the core classes. But yet, it's almost, when you break up the 128 credit hours, you take 36 of that, that's over 25% of your degree that we really were not paying attention to and we didn't think mattered. And consequently, it wasn't surprising, our students didn't think it mattered either. All right? So you get that marketing student sitting in accounting principal. I don't know if there's any CBA alumni here or not. But you get that accounting student sitting in principles of accounting, and you get that marketing student sitting in principles of accounting. Not surprising that the marketing student doesn't think this is important. Not surprising that when the accounting major takes marketing, they have no use for that. All right? So we had that big piece of curriculum that really, it had been tinkered with, right? But honestly, and I was in charge of this. This was the big thing, that the reason Ravi got me to go to the dark side. He said, you can try appreciative inquiry. We're gonna do this. It's an interesting story because our dean resigned, right?
This is the one that was there for 20 years. Did you change it?
No. Oh, no. In that 20 years, we had 16s.
Oh.
That's another reason it didn't ever get changed. I mean, the reasons it didn't get changed go on and on, right? But we had a dean that resigned rather abruptly, decided to go back to teaching, right? And that's where I'll stop. So my colleague that I had taught with, and we had team taught, he all of a sudden becomes interim dean. We're like, holy mackerel, what's going on? Right? Well, actually, he was acting dean. Then he immediately puts a person in a position that had not been filled for 2 or 3 years as associate dean, and he was acting associate dean. And then he comes to me and he says, don't you want to be assistant dean? I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I really want to do. He says, you know what we're going to do while we're all acting? We're going to change this curriculum. So I was like, awesome, what do we have to lose, right? And I really think that was part of what made this work. But the long and short of it is, and then also we had another piece of curriculum, which was our MBA. Our MBA had not been changed for 20 years, other than a little bit of tinkering. Now, in our defense, I will tell you that if you go across the country to colleges of business, you will find that is not the exception. And there are still lots of MBAs out there that haven't had anything significant done to them for 20 years. They may have changed their name, they may have changed the packaging, but when you go back, and I did this, I went back and looked at old bulletins, and I was just shocked. I was like, literally, this is the same curriculum. And I had been there for 20-some years, so I knew it was the same. I knew it hadn't changed. The crazy thing was, and I think you could go back 10 more years and see, really incremental change, but nothing big. So we had these 2 big pieces of curriculum, major pieces that we just were not paying attention to, we weren't changing, and they were not relevant, right? And typically in academia, and I always get embarrassed when I work with our advisory board people when they're talking about, well, let's change this and let's change that. And I'll say, oh, great. If we start now, we can get this so it will be in effect of fall 2014. And they look at you like, what? Change does not occur quickly in academia. It typically takes what we did in 10 months, usually 3 to 4 years. Because we would do it one little piece at a time. And we would play the politics of every little department. We never got everybody in the same room at the same, everybody in one room at the same time and made them say to each other, the things they said behind about each other when they were in separate meetings, right? So that kind of stuff didn't get said. It was amazing what the conversation was and how it changed people. So that's what we did. We got faculty, employers, administrators, staff, students, and our advisors, which would be pretty much our whole system, okay? We only did a half-day summit. We did not get 3 or 4 days. There's no way you would get that system anywhere for 3 or 4 days. So we did 2 identical half-day sessions. We had one session in the morning on a Friday. It was like 3 hours from 9 till noon. And then we had one from, or maybe it was 9 to 12:30. Doesn't matter. It was 3.5 hours. And we had another one in the afternoon. Identical sessions, different people. We had about 70 people at both sessions, at each session. So we had 140-ish people, or 120. And what we ended up with, what we walked out of there with, which was our big payoff, was a mandate for change. When you get everybody from every department sitting at a table with employers and advisors and administrators, and you look at each other and say, you know what, really it's time to change this curriculum. We had the mandate for change. We had the agreement. And so we were able to do those 2 things from beginning to the end. It was 1 year. It took us 10 months to get faculty approval, and then basically 2 more months to get it through the rest of the university. So what I'm going to do is just go through sort of, the materials that we used and what we did. So this was our invitation, all right? This went out to lots of employers. It went out to all our faculty. We said that our task, our summit, we were going to have an appreciative inquiry summit on curriculum only. Okay, we're not talking about anything else other than curriculum. We're talking about research. We're not talking about service. We're not talking about placement, any of that kind of stuff, just curriculum. And we gave it the title, Building Generation A. Okay, so that, A for Akron, right? And A for good and all that sort of thing. So Building Generation A. And here we give this invitation, we say you're a key stakeholder in the success of the CBA as we move forward to improve these 2 pieces of curriculum. Your input is valuable, blah, 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 blah. It'll be a 3-hour interactive event. We gave them our topic statement. And our topic statement was, the CBA is a recognized provider of quality business programs as evidenced by recent rankings. We will sustain this in the future through an innovative, applied, and cross-disciplinary approach to learning. In addition to the learning outcomes already embedded in our programs and co-curricular student experiences, we will focus on Generation A competencies. These competencies are overarching and will transcend all programs. They've been selected based on input from the CBA's strategic planning focus groups, strategic priorities of the University of Akron, and the University System of Ohio. And then we went in and talked about what the competencies are. Okay, so Generation A needs these competencies. We're going to get together, the whole system in the room, for 3 hours and take the first steps to figure out what that would look like for the University of Akron College of Business, right? So so there's the morning session and the evening session, and we're looking forward to you being there, and it's totally optional, And the interesting thing for us was that we did have every department represented, but it was amazing to me following the stereotypes. When you think of management, marketing, finance, and accounting, who do you think had the fewest number of people there? Accounting and finance. To the point where there were people that actually, I sort of went door to door extending this friendly invitation because I was still faculty. They were still thinking of me as faculty, so I wasn't threatening or anything like that. And people said, okay, I'll come. And literally, I can remember there were 3 people that were so uncomfortable with the type of sharing and the talking about positive and all this sort of thing. They were just like, I have to leave. I'm like, okay, fine. Take your box lunch with you. You at least made an effort, right? Okay, so the 4 Ds of appreciative inquiry, and when you have a 3 to 4 day summit, this is basically you do each one of these on one day, all right? So the first one is discovery, and there's a really standard exercise that you do, which I'll go over in just a second. That's where you discover your positive core. That's where you figure out, as a group, you come to consensus on what is it we value most relative to your particular task, okay? So ours was, what is it that we value most? What do we want the core values to be as we create this new curriculum? Then dreaming is when you create images of the future. So this is when you say, okay, we've been through this exercise. We've figured out what we value the most. You create themes from what individuals say. And then you say, all right, how do we apply those themes to what we're trying to do? So like ours came out as being, they wanted our core values, our positive core came out to be that we are really, really well connected to business. Okay, we have over 250 advisory board members. We have very loyal alumni. Okay, we're just connected in Akron, not so much in Cleveland, but in Akron. So we wanted our curriculum to leverage that. That was one of our positive things. We are an unusually collaborative faculty. So we wanted the curriculum to reflect collaboration. We wanted it to be interdisciplinary. And we wanted it, what was the other one? Interdisciplinary, collaborative, leverage, business connection. Oh, we wanted it to be real world. We don't have a doctoral program, so even our research tends to be more applied, all right? So we wanted our curriculum to reflect that it was going to be real world, it was going to, prepare our students for the real world. So then we had to go and say, okay, what does a curriculum that has those values look like? What does it look like? If that's what we want, what would it look like? And we did that. Now, we got those 2 steps done in 3 hours. Then the rest of it, design, where then you start breaking this up and say, okay, if we want a curriculum that looks like this, then we just start, you start setting some sub-goals. And you basically start making an action plan. And then you figure out how you're going to implement it. So then you assign it to committees and teams and that sort of thing, to individuals. And so we did this part in our summit, and then we did the rest of it through our committee structure. And we actually ended up creating a couple ad hoc committees. And we said, we're going to use these committees to drive this change, and then they go away until the next time we're ready to do that. So that's it, though. Discovery, dream, design, and destiny. Go ahead.
Did you include students, alumni, and employers in your
Yes.
group?
Yeah, we did. Yep. So the first thing we did, when you came in, we had name tags for people, and we had assigned people to tables. And we had assigned them so that each table was a little microcosm of the whole system. So there wasn't a table full of faculty, there wasn't a table full of staff people, there wasn't a table full of employers. They were mixed up. And so you go to your table, right? And we gave them their first, and this is a classic appreciative inquiry thing, is this interview that you do. This is a classic thing, and this is one of the things I think can be leveraged and used in other ways, right? So their first thing was to complete, you have questions 1 through 3, write your answers in your handout, you have 15 minutes to do it. And it was just reflective, just yourself, all right? And then what happened was we said, okay, within your group, pair up and interview each other. And the interview was basically, the things that we had asked you to think about for 15 minutes. And these were the questions. Think back to when you first decided to join the organization. What attracted you to join? Why did you ever even become a part of this? Second one, reflect on your entire time with the organization. Think about high points and low points. Tell me a story about a time when you felt the most alive, the most engaged, the most proud of yourself and our organization. What was it about you, others, and the organization that made your high point experience possible? Okay, so you do this, and typically, the way we set the tables up, you were, so it was a faculty member talking to an employer that maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. It was a employer talking to a student. It was any combination of those. And so, you would say to the employer, when was the first time you ever hired a CBA grad? And our employers were also people who are on our advisory boards. When did you join the advisory board? Why did you ever join the advisory board? What attracted you? Or if they were alumni, why did you come to the CBA to begin with, right? And so you do these interviews, and you take notes, and then what you do, and what we did too was you would switch. So if we were an interview team, I would interview you, and then you would interview me, okay? Then you get back in your big group, and you introduce each other to the larger group. And these were, I think our tables were maybe 8 to 10 people. So you introduce your interview partner. And then you share the stories that were told. You tell your interview partner's story. They don't tell their own story. Okay? So you tell their story. And then what you begin to do then is you try to identify common themes of these stories. So that's how, you end up with the whole system saying, what is good and positive? What are we when we're at our best? And you identify these themes. And then what we did, and this is a lot of the facilitating, you do have to give people really specific instructions because two things. One, you will have some people that are not used to being in teams like this. And B, you will have people that are uncomfortable. You will have people who are uncomfortable talking about, telling a story about when I felt engaged and I felt excited. Because you might be somebody that's like, seriously, I can't imagine you ever felt excited about anything. All right? And here I am asking you to tell me this story of when you love the organization and blah, blah, blah. People can get very uncomfortable with that. So you really have to give them a lot of structure. And you have to have people going around and making sure that they're, people aren't talking about sports, they're talking about the weather, that they're staying on task. So you have to have a facilitator who's mindful. They're paying attention. They're not just, hanging out there. And then what you do is you create a map of the themes. And this is another thing that the facilitator does. So, I know that isn't great, but what it should show you is, so what we did was we had 3 giant pieces of foam board. And they got put on the wall. And they're pretty big. And you blow up your topic statement, and you put it in the middle there, so it's always there. And you have your topic statement everywhere. You have it on every table. We had little table tents with it on, so everybody remembers, what we're supposed to be talking about. Then you have your facility. So then you have people report out from these groups of 8 to 10 people who have identified these common themes in the stories. And they start saying what their themes are, and what your facilitator does then is start trying to map this. So when they hear something new, when she heard, centers of excellence, okay, she hears that theme, and she hadn't heard that before, so she makes a line for it. And then she hears something else, but she says, well, that relates to centers of excellence, right? So that's what so you have to have somebody who has that skill. who can kind of, categorize things. They can hear the themes, and they can kind of keep it organized. It was really fun to watch her do this. And so you make this map of the themes. And so now you've gotten everybody's story. You have, 70 people in the room. Everyone has told their story. Everyone has told somebody else's story. So now I have 2 stories in my head, right? And I've heard 8 other stories. And you get 70 stories up on one piece of paper, one map, in about an hour. Okay? And then the next thing we did, so you create a map, you arrive at a common commitment to the value. So this is what we did, right? I'll come back to that. Then the next thing whoops, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. The next thing we did was we don't want to arrive at consensus, because you're not going to do that, right? This is not a consensus building methodology, but we wanted commitment. So what we asked was, everybody had 3 stickers. And if we go back to the picture, you can see the dots. Yeah, okay. So you had 3 stickers, and everybody could go up, and you vote what you thought the most important core value was. What you thought the most important positive thing about the organization was, and was going to be most important in designing curriculum. You have 3 votes. If you want to put all 3 of them on one thing, you can. If you want to put 2 on one and 1 on another, you want to put all 3 on 3 different things. So then you have this big visual that is pretty darn clear where the clusters are. And the great thing, which I don't know what we would have done if this didn't happen, our afternoon map and our morning map looked the same. Thank goodness, right? Because the way people showed up in the morning and the afternoon was just random. It was just whatever worked best for them. So what we have then is this visual aid that says, the 70 people that are part of this whole system that were sitting in the room together, this is what they said they want. All right? So then what I did, and there's, some little close-ups of a lot of things about partnerships, a lot of things about collaboration. See the collaboration one, that comes out. And then I can't remember what transportation of attitudes meant. But anyways. So what we did with that then, and we had people who consciously chose not to come to this. All right? And these were the people who had been fighting curriculum change for 20 years. And they didn't come, and that was fine.
They were tenured or ready to coast and retire?
Well, they were people that just didn't want to change what they teach. They were very selfish, I think, very self-oriented. Yeah. And they were also people who, I don't know if you're familiar with faculty life. They're just cranky people who object to everything. Everything.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. Every faculty has them.
I had a few of those.
Sure. And you've all had them as professors, right? All right? They didn't come, but I knew what was going to happen. I knew that when I started presenting these curriculum proposals that were coming out of committees, they were going to be in those college meetings, and they were going to be the ones objecting, right? So what I did every college meeting was I put this up, and I dragged that thing into the room with me. And I would drag that, we had a big poster that was the dream, destiny, design, or whatever it is, I can't get them in order. I would bring that with me. And I would start every meeting with, the proposals coming to you today have come out of committee work that came out of the summit, where the people there said, this is what we want. And they were silenced. They were silenced. And they were very marginalized. It became, because they were people who they would just let them kowtow to them. And younger faculty would let them boss them around and stuff. And so they just lost their credibility. And people just didn't listen to them anymore. The power of positive just overwhelmed them. And most of them actually have retired since 2010. It's just too positive there. It's just too, they can't stand it. They can't stand it, right? Now, and the thing that, so we had this mandate for change, and I every time I got up in front of a group, it was like, oh, here goes Susan again. She's going to tell us about our mandate for change, and I did. And never let them forget it. But in return, we had to deliver. We had to deliver. The most common comment I got from people as they walked out of the summits was, do you think something will finally change now? And I told Ravi, our dean, I said, if we're not going to do this, if we're not going to really follow through with this, I'm not doing it. Because I was putting all my credibility with all my peers out there, right? So we ended up with an awesome core curriculum. We have the big change that we made was we have a 3-course sequence on business analytics in our core curriculum. And nobody has that yet. Nobody around here has that. So we know that a differentiating factor of every CBA graduate is they know how to use spreadsheets, they know how to play with big data, they know how to interpret statistics. They're not experts, but you can at least train them very quickly to do things the way you do it, right? And they know what it is. So that was huge. We then were able, we didn't have the faculty to teach that, so we then, all of us actors, had to go up to Luis and say, hey, Luis, we made these big changes, we made these big promises to our faculty, we need some faculty lines, and we got them. We got them. So that was one big change. The other big change in our undergraduate curriculum was adding professional development, adding writing and leadership and things like that to our curriculum. At the graduate level, we also added business analytics to that. We added supply chain to that. We also added professional integrity, the leadership, and negotiations, which are, we're one of the few schools around that has experts in negotiations. And we weren't using them. You know, we had an awesome elective that everybody loved, but about 1/10 of our students took it. We thought, well, duh. You know, maybe we should have everyone take that. So we have, and our curriculum is not perfect. We're still tweaking it. But those major changes, they just would never have occurred if we hadn't done something like this. So some factors for summit success. You get 100 voices instead of 5. The Bank of Scotland referred to their summit as 100 voices. That's what they title. It's good to come up with a catchy title. Some organizations go as far as to make T-shirts for them and that kind of stuff. We're too cheap to do that, but you know. So instead of getting the 5 people at the top of the organization, you get 100 voices, right? You have to have commitment to appreciative inquiry from top leadership. You have to have top leadership. The dean has to be there. The provost was there. The president wasn't. It's not appropriate for him, you know. But the provost, he's the chief academic officer. He has to be there, or she has to be there. You have to, even if it makes you uncomfortable, it's a little kumbaya-ish for you, it's a little too soft for you, you have to publicly be committed to an unconditional focus on positive. All right? You have to have the whole system in the room the whole time. You have to be committed to follow through, tons of planning. You need to create a narrative of the summit. That's what I did. I had that down to, 3 sentences and a couple pictures. And I had a video of it, and I sent it to the cranky people, and I'm sure they never watched it. I sent it to everyone who wasn't there, right? I'm sure they never watched it. But we have it. It's still there. You have to have minimal facilitation. You don't want your facilitator inserting themselves into anything saying, well, don't you think you should think about this, and what about that, and blah, blah. That's why it's almost better to have somebody that isn't overly familiar with your business, isn't overly familiar with your company, all right? So you have to have meaningful, but they have to be mindful. They really have to be paying attention. Facilitation. You have to have healthy physical and relational space. So you have, like a room like this would be an awesome place to have a summit for a small group of people. You know, you have to have a pleasant surroundings. People have to be comfortable. Of course, it was, you know, blue jeans and it was casual attire. Everybody took their ties off, right? And relational space. And I have to tell you, my big fear was that some of those cranky people would come. I'm like, and it was going to be my job to, I don't know, control them, whatever. Keep them away, put them where I thought people could deal with them. So you have to have healthy relational. If you have a caustic environment, if people never talk to each other about positive things, you can't do this. You cannot do this. You know, it's not magic. So it has to be consistent, you know, with what you do. Those were our images of the future, right? Collaboration, business and community involvement, innovative curriculum, global integration, and our educational approach was to share success, learn how to learn, engage students. Yeah, that was it. Okay, questions?
I have just two. When you said earlier about this is for rapid change, it seems like there's a whole heck of a lot that goes into this to equate to rapid change. I'm just not seeing how this is a model for rapid change. This just seems like it's so
big.
intense. So that's question number one. Question number two, I thought this was geared towards this meeting for entrepreneurs and small business people, yet when you talked about AI, the perspective of 100 people to 10,000 people, how do you scale this down so the small mom and pop shop, or is this not for the mom and pop shop? And you got to realize if the target audience that this, at least from the marketing standpoint, is saying entrepreneur, small business, I get a different picture than.
Well, I think the entrepreneurs of small business, I think about easily could be a couple hundred people. I mean, I think you're thinking more micro business or self entrepreneur. So, yeah, honestly, I was not applied towards micro types of business. Now, having said that, I'm glad you said that because I did have one thing that I don't have a slide that I wanted to talk about was how you can adapt it. One of the effective ways to adapt it is to use it with performance appraisal. Okay, so if it's not appropriate, you know, to have a whole, or even like interviewing, even selecting people. I know it's a common behavioral interviewing thing to say to somebody, tell me a problem that you solved, and how did you solve that problem, okay? Using the appreciative inquiry methodology, you say to people, tell me when you were at your best. What is the, tell me when you felt the best about yourself in a job professionally. When you do performance evaluations, you can start out with, what'd you do best this year? Tell me about the success that you are most proud of this evaluation period. And then tell me why that happened. And then tell me what I need to give you more of to make that happen more. So you can, that's one of the adaptations that the purists of appreciative inquiry would not like. But I have been trying with MBA students to give them an assignment to try this in a 1 semester time frame. I made that up, and a lot of them have used it and had. It's one of the few things I've gotten emails from people like a couple years later where they say, I'm still using that approach to interviewing and that approach to performance evaluation, and it works. You know, it's just a better way to talk about things. And I think your first question about, are you just talking about how big it would be to create? Yeah, I mean, well, and again, I guess it's going to be, everything's relative. You know, so if it takes you, and it could take you, I mean, it took me, even for my little one, it took me from October, it took me 2 months to plan it. If I was really doing a big one, it would take 2 months, spending a lot more time on it, or maybe even longer. If you've got people that are travel, I mean, you might be working out 6 months. Go ahead.
Would you mind if I added something also to your answer?
Oh, no.
Are you familiar with SOAR?
No.
There's a book, it's called The Thin Book of SOAR, S-O-A-R. It's an alternate to SWOT, so when you do your annual planning or strategic planning, and it uses the AI concepts, and that is something that if you do that type of planning in your small business would have a great application in a smaller setting.
You know who the author is?
I do
It's
not.
called
It's
SOAR?
called The Thin Book of SOAR.
SOAR.
And you can get it on Amazon. S-O-A-R.
I bet you could get it at your library, too.
Opportunities.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I can't remember what the A and the R stand for, but yeah, The Thin Book of SOAR that you can find on Amazon. It's this big. It's like it's like not something you have to engross in learning.
Right.
It gives you some great practical suggestions on it.
Great.
I do something similar for small businesses because you can't shut the business down.
Right.
But I do the interviews.
Okay. So you do the interviews. You go around and ask people, tell me about when you were at your best. Yeah. To do that. Okay. Good. Okay. Go ahead.
I got a question. How do you manage the change? And also, how do you evaluate the change?
So how do you manage the change? So how do you keep it moving?
Evaluate.
Evaluate it?
Yeah.
Well, you set goals. You know, one of the things that comes out after you've envisioned what you want to be, and then what happens is, you know, you will end up at some point talking about problems or things that need to get fixed. But what you're doing is you're backing into that, so you've got your eye on this positive thing, and you say, if we want to do this, if we want to become this positive thing that we want to become, then this is what we're going to have to do. This is what we're going to have to change. And typically then that gets translated into very specific tasks that you have to do. So one of ours, like we said, okay, one of the first things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to benchmark. We're going to have to do some research and go out there and see, you know, what other organizations are doing, not necessarily colleges, but how do you do that? And so we assigned that to a team. And they had a date and a deadline for when they had to make a report back to the curriculum committee. And so you just have to start breaking it down, goals. You have to assign that work to somebody, and you have to make them accountable. You have to go back and say, you know, we're looking for your report in 2 weeks or, you know, in a month. How are you doing? And if they're not on point, then you have to make that happen.
Going to the change, I'm thinking that it is a dynamic one.
Yeah.
And you need to push it to change. And like when you throw a stone in the water, there'll be a water waves.
Right.
And the waves disappear. We will like make another one. This kind of related with the timing control.
So do you do another summit? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think this is something you do on a regular basis. This is what makes some of the impact. All right? I don't anticipate us. I don't think there's anything that big right now that we need the whole system to do for a long time. All right? We know we still have pieces, like we want to do something with placement. Well, that doesn't require the whole system. That's not going to impact the whole system. So I think it is one big wave. One big wave, and I'm not going to keep sending waves. It's going to be the one big one. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I enjoyed it. I felt like I was teaching an MBA class. Right?